Great, thank you for responding. So this is the first of 4 small group meetings that we're hosting to gather input regarding the 3 different options that have come about as a result of stakeholder interviews and synthesizing the input that we received from those stakeholders into a visual format. And we'd like to present those like we did last night, but have more opportunity for public discussion and input, and really get into some of the opportunities, the strengths of each of the different options, as well as maybe some concerns and preferences regarding the options that are available. So with that, I think it would be helpful, Mike, if you could pull up the options, and we could start with option 1. And if you could maybe walk through that one again at a high level, and then we'll open the floor up for comments, questions, concerns, and discussion, and spend some time on option 1, and think until we've exhausted commentary, and then move on to option 2, and then the hybrid, which is a combination of option 1 and option 2, which we refer to as option 3. So with that, Mike, if you could do that, and then we'll hear from the public.
Okay, I think what I'll do is just kind of go through the same presentation a little bit quicker than we did last night, and then the final 3 slides we can get into, which is the big picture of those 3 options. So this is just an overall view of the project area, basically going from where Cruse Avenue meets Park on the south. South is to the left of my screen and north is to the right. East is the bottom where the Rodney Street neighborhood is. So we have Cruse coming along up to the point where it meets Broadway, and then continuing on to 6th, and then on to Lawrence. So I'm just going to kind of move from south to north with the 3 different options. First one that we studied was what we're calling a narrowed street option. So taking the 65 feet of right-of-way that Cruse Avenue currently occupies, which is mostly asphalt right now, narrowing the street to a 40-foot wide section of paved asphalt. So there'd be 2 drive lanes at 12 feet, parallel parking on either side, so that we still have a lot of parking throughout the entire zone. Actually increases some of the parking in some of the areas. Then we end up with a bike lane, which in all of the schemes is this dark gray line. In the street option, this would be separated from the street with like a curb, but would also not, it would be at street level, so it would be part of an asphalt. So that's like an additional 5 feet of asphalt there. Moving from the south to the north, there's quite a large area of right-of-way that would be available for additional housing. In each of these schemes, the red rooftops represent either housing, as in this case, or it could be a more commercial structure. This one down here next to Helena Housing Authority would be additional housing for the Helena Housing Authority. But on the south end, these could be something like townhouses, sort of tighter row house type living, sort of urban edge type housing. Then of course we have expanded green space, and there's sort of this orange meandering walk which would sort of go along and be located in that vacated right-of-way space. So we have about 25 feet along Cruse in this scheme, which gets freed up. Part of that gets taken up by the bike lane, but then the remaining part can be kind of a nice meandering pedestrian path with opportunities to have little areas where benches could be situated, so that as people are walking along, they can just sit and relax. So that's what we're seeing here. Then we get up to Cutler Street, where we kind of realign Cutler to meet Cruse in a perpendicular manner, which is a little bit more pedestrian and vehicular friendly. There's a large amount of right-of-way right here. I'll back up and kind of see where the old Cruse Avenue sort of branched, or Cutler branched into Cruse with green space, which is kind of underutilized right now. So by narrowing up Cutler Street and coming in, we do free up quite a bit of right-of-way again here that then could be acquired by the housing authority and turned into another housing complex there. One of the big moves that we're doing on all three of these schemes, and the schemes are not dependent on this happening, but is taking the city's dang, now I'm drawing a blank, neighborhood center right here at the end of the walking mall, and assuming that it could be relocated in a different location that might be more central to the people that are actually utilizing it. So what we're showing is kind of an extension of the walking mall, which would come over and sort of link to the south end of the walking mall, and then have expanded park land space where Anchor Park is. So there's sort of a very large urban park space in the southern part of Helena. And then that walkway comes up to where the current pedestrian underpass is, leading to Anchor Park. And the thought is, as this sidewalk meanders along the eastern edge of Cruse, when we get to that point, we could introduce a set of stairs that actually gets down to that underpass for people to walk and engage with Anchor Park. And then we're also thinking about enhancing sort of access up to the fire tower itself, either with some initial steps that lead to the trail system that goes up there, so that we're kind of connecting the fire tower with this minor gathering space in this street solution to the park on this part of town. So then you can see as we continue to the north, this 25-foot zone where it abuts adjacent City Park becomes a fairly nice pedestrian linear path that comes up and meets Broadway. So then we have Cruse from Broadway. Right here is where we just left off that last slide. Comes over to 6th Avenue and then ultimately ends at Lawrence, which is the end of our project area. So in these two blocks, we're really sort of looking at trying to maximize some additional housing options in the area. Each of these red rooftops in these three areas actually takes up portions of city lots or all of this city lot. For more sort of urban dwelling, this would all be market rate housing, but on the more affordable scale, because it's typically 2-story townhouse type construction with adjacent party walls and sort of tuck under garages that would sort of be accessed off of these parking lots. So we've got the narrowed street solution still happening with the bike path and the pedestrian zone, trying to enhance connections between the neighborhoods to the east and the ability to actually get down to the downtown and the walking mall area or Last Chance Gulch. And so this portion of this actually exists right now. The sidewalk exists. Sort of thinking about doing a little bulb out for pedestrian crossing on Jackson Street here, and possibly taking this alley and turning it into an extension of that sort of park idea that then connects up to Cruse Avenue and then ultimately connects across Warren Street to the neighborhood. This still provides access to the Chamber Building off of 6th, eliminates the access that's currently off of Cruse Avenue, and infills part of that lot with additional houses, but the access is maintained, and we're actually able to maintain most of the parking in that area. Then moving to the intersection of 6th and Cruse, we've got bulbed out pedestrian crossings and bike lanes that cross over, showing an apartment style building that could get built in part of the lot that is the Helena Independent Record Building, which is this building right here. And then we've got the 7th Avenue Gym. And this little location right here in both schemes becomes kind of a node where sort of shifted the pedestrian path to the other side, because the views into the downtown are pretty incredible from this spot right here. So we thought we'd create kind of a plaza space with stairs that go down to the parking lot, and could potentially be a pathway that leads across, again, Jackson Street to Constitution Park, which ultimately leads down to Last Chance Gulch and the Walking Mall again. And then finishing out to the north, we've got this pedestrian path again happening, sort of shifting the green space to the west side of Cruse in this location, and ends right here, showing the possibility of having kind of a commercial mixed-use retail building in part of the lot that is behind Bert and Ernie's and across from the Holter Museum. So that is option 1, which is the narrowed street option. I'm going to shift to the idea that sort of grew out of, it didn't sort of, it did grow out of our stakeholder workshops. This is kind of an extreme option of turning Cruse Avenue into a linear park and eliminating vehicular traffic along Cruse almost in its entirety, and turning it into a 65 to 80 foot wide park that becomes an amenity for Helena that is unique, very specific, doesn't exist, I think, anywhere else in any of the major cities in Montana, and creates some pretty incredible opportunities to have some public spaces, have a very green-like corridor adjacent to our downtown, which I think the stakeholders sort of felt this could become sort of an attraction to bring people to Helena that's different and provides incredible walking and bicycle paths through the area. In this solution, we do maintain vehicular access from Cutler to Park, so that basically there's a loop capability. So anybody who's coming down Park Avenue can actually continue up the Cruse section to Cutler and then feed into the South Rodney neighborhoods, which is part of the Urban Renewal District for downtown Helena as well. So this would have the positive effect of probably having some enhanced opportunities in that neighborhood for increased retail and property redevelopment, but sort of see the traffic patterns focusing more on Park and Broadway, and not so much taking the Cruse Avenue bypass. So similar ideas in a lot of this, except the green space becomes a lot wider. The bicycle path is still this gray path shown through the area. There's a lot of opportunities for more public plaza spaces, sort of overlooks like this one. There's about a 40-foot drop in elevation from this plaza down to the park. And so the views looking into Mount Helena and the south side of Helena are pretty incredible. We sort of introduced where that node was, where the pedestrian underpass is, into Anchor Park, an elevated platform, which could be a fire tower, plaza, so that as people sort of have opportunities to hike up to the fire tower, there's this link between the fire tower and this plaza and this green space, sort of urban park down here. Opportunities for a large amphitheater space, outdoor performance space, along with the park itself. And then as we head a little bit to the north, there's sort of this unique opportunity in the hillside that leads up to the fire tower for a smaller sort of impromptu performance space as well. Moving to the next 2 blocks, concept is similar, with basically the difference being the street is gone. So again, we have this interesting ability or opportunity to create, this park setting with housing off of it, access to the city, lots of trees and greenery, sort of a little pavilion space, perhaps, that could be used for anything. And then pedestrian crossing and bike crossings. Here we are at that sort of node across from the 7th Avenue gym again, where we can have a larger plaza space. And then the path continuing on to Lawrence. And so the third option, this is just a summary of the first 2. So this is an overall view of the narrowed street solution. Still is actually kind of nice. There's still a linear park component to this that is unique, that we can take advantage of with the narrowed street. It's just normally about a 25-foot wide park versus a 65-foot wide park. And then the second option combined is our linear park idea. And the third, which is just kind of a hybrid of the two, where some comments from stakeholders revolved around Cruse Avenue is actually more heavily used for vehicles from Broadway down to Neal in the intersecting streets than it is from Broadway south to Park. So really, there's sort of any combination of these that could come together to repurpose Cruse Avenue. So with that, I'm going to get back to just having those up on the screen and open this up for comments and discussion.
Hi, Mike and Adam. This is Mickey from the Business Improvement District. Thanks for this presentation. It's nice to kind of see something conceptual after we visited a couple months ago. I just had a couple quick questions, if I might. Do you guys know how many parking spaces with these designs would be taken out or added? Did you guys figure that out at all? Do you have numbers for me?
We have not done an exact count. I think that's something we could work on in the next phase. I know the focus has been trying to not affect parking in the more heavily used areas, and only sort of take away where maybe there's an abundance of parking or they're not fully utilized. I do know that by allowing parallel parking on both sides of the street throughout the entire district, my sense is we're not going to lose any on-street parking. But the biggest impact on parking, really, as that we've been hearing, is probably this lot at the corner of Broadway and Cruse, which does get used, I think, by patrons who are going down on Broadway and some of the other businesses in that area.
Nice. And then I think this was probably at least an idea that you guys got from me and maybe others, was that amphitheater idea, which is great. And you kind of have it in your drawing for option 2. Is
Yep.
there, I mean, is there a way, do you think, if you don't actually close off the part of Cruse to make that a pedestrian mall, to still have enough space if Rocky Mountain Development goes out, to still have an amphitheater in there to kind of go adjacent with Anchor Park and Pioneer Park? Does that make sense? I'm just curious what the square footage is and what your guys' plan was for that, if you could still take that concept but still have Cruse open.
So I don't think that particular idea could happen in either option 1 or option 2. If you look at the screen, I think my screen is still sharing, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, it is.
So here you see in option 2, the park that is shown, and then in option 1, it's really the same park. I just didn't draw the amphitheater in that scheme, so it could still be there.
Gotcha.
The 2 solutions wouldn't prevent that from happening. Probably the biggest question would be whether or not the neighborhood center, if there's some justifiable questions about whether or not that actually should be removed.
Right.
Mostly because of, is there really ability to build a new building for them or to find a new location for them if this building gets taken out?
Cool. Okay, I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess one of the things I've been kind of wondering, anybody could chime in, but is there anything in any of these schemes that jumps out to people as, just things, solutions that shouldn't happen, or, immediately you look at it and you say, yeah, maybe it's a nice idea, but it's unrealistic or something like that?
So Mike, I've gotten a couple emails and calls about this morning. One of the things that people have been concerned about is the removal of the neighborhood center from a couple of these options. And just the concern for that service not being available, in the downtown anymore, potentially. That's just what they've been saying. So,
Yeah,
I don't know.
I was gathering that
Yeah,
from
definitely.
comments from last night's meeting as well, definitely.
Yeah, it seemed to be consistent. One of the thoughts that I've had, and I'll just throw that out there as just kind of spitballing, is what makes that facility suitable for the neighborhood center and the services that are being provided there? Is it something that can't be accommodated in another building just because of their type of facility requirements, or could it be reasonable to assume that they could be relocated to another facility with minimal, adaptability that would be required?
I mean, I think they could for sure be accommodated in another facility. I think the thinking is that this is an ideal location due to they have a Head Start program and a senior program and other programs in there as well. But for those 2 specifically, the access to the parkland was, paramount in these folks thinking. Kids can go and play in on the play structures in Pioneer Park or whatever the case might be. So they were thinking that was an ideal situation for them.
Okay. Because one building that's come up quite a bit in our discussions about Cruse has been the 7th Avenue gym. And, that's right next to the school. If they were to relocate, would that be a possibility, that 7th Avenue gym facility?
I would imagine that would be too small for their needs. Maybe Sharon or Ellie can chime in. I don't know much about Rocky's operations in that building other than those two aspects.
So this is Sharon. So they do the senior meal program, not only on site, but Meals on Wheels out of the neighborhood center. And that kitchen also provides food for the Head Start kids. The 7th Avenue gym would take quite a bit of renovation to do that. So I'm not sure that, and I think Mike is right. There'd be a couple issues. One would be the size of it and the parking around that facility. So ideally, it's nice to co-locate that senior meal component in the Head Start, so they aren't shipping meals back and forth. And I think the downtown location is ideal because in addition to those two programs, they have other programs that Rocky runs. So I would think if we're going to move the neighborhood center, we'd have to have a concerted effort to find a good location that is easily accessible. And that's the other thing about the 7th Avenue gym. It's not the most accessible building in the world. And you've got a senior component, so that would make it a little bit difficult, and the kid component, and they would be sharing the playground with the central school. And I don't know if that playground, how big it is, or whether that can accommodate, or how the school district would feel about that. I do know that school district is looking for alternative uses for that and possibly disposing of that building.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, and just a real quick note, that originally was a community development block grant per building. So there aren't any restrictions on it. I would think technically the use of it as an open park would fit any of the provisions that it has to be used for CDBG eligible type activities. So that wouldn't be a barrier. I think the bigger barrier is finding a good location for everybody. It is, and during the day when there is school and senior meals, it is quite a busy building.
Well, I know that one of the concerns that we had just with the facility and its location was how we can create more cohesiveness between the walking mall, the pedestrian mall, and Cruse Avenue. And, as we look at the nexus between, the park, the walking mall, and Cruse, and the configuration of, the curb cut and access, that was one of the primary drivers, is to try and, presenting the option of relocating that. But I wonder if there was a way in which we could reconfigure maybe, the parking access, the curb cut on Cruse that is adjacent to the park. And if there would be a way to reconfigure that in such a manner where we could still accomplish some of the goals of connecting, the walking mall up to Cruse, enhancing and expanding the green space, and creating more connectivity while keeping the neighborhood center there. Mike, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that would be something that could be examined?
So I just drew an arrow that highlights a current pathway that actually does lead down to the park. Just as a follow-up thought, ideally, I think we need to come out of this with a plan that is doable. I've been doing this in Helena for more than 20 years and involved in a lot of planning efforts. And the worst ones are the ones that get done and sit on the shelf and nothing happens. So if the neighborhood center, I think that's something we need to all discuss very seriously about whether or not that's a realistic thing to move. Because if the cost of doing that puts this whole idea on the shelf and makes this an unrealistic plan, then I don't think we're doing a service to this whole effort. But getting back to your question, Adam, the current curb cut that leads into that parking lot, I think is the only location where that can be, unless, and I'll draw another arrow here, unless there could be a deal worked out with the owner of the federal building to provide access through their lot. The grade becomes so steep as you move south between Cruse and the parking lot down below that this is literally the only location you can access that lot, unless, like I said, we could get some sort of access between, you know, shared access to that facility there.
Right.
Because I do think there's an opportunity to connect the park to Cruse Avenue through that little zone that I was just identifying, you know, and create perhaps an expanded area in this sort of this part, if we could relocate that curb cut where the park is just a smaller sort of connection up to Cruse, and we leave the parking lot down below, leave the building in place, enhance that connection, provide the ability for people walking underneath Cruse Avenue on the other side to get up to Cruse Avenue, like the diagrams were showing, then that's a very doable solution. I don't know what people think about that.
I don't necessarily think it's, sorry, this is Ellie Ray. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad idea. I'm actually just wondering though, if there's the possibility, working with Rocky, the city sponsoring them for a grant or something to get a PAR done and consider actually relocation of that building on the site, and moving it up into the lot. And you probably know offhand, Mike, better than I do about the elevations with that lot. But as I recall, the parking lot kind of slopes down toward the building, right?
Correct.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know if maybe we could, there could be a way to accommodate the building elsewhere on that site, maybe on, you know, the southwest corner of the parking lot or something, and have it be taller, and maybe even include a little, because of the elevations, you might be able to get a little parking underground, or something, and then retain some of the existing parking spaces. That lot's never 100% full based on what I've seen, but I could be wrong. I would defer to Lori Lattice and her staff on that front. But if it could be accommodated there so that, you know, there's still connectivity for people that live in Emmy Anderson who are elderly and or disabled that go there for services, or from any of the other housing in the vicinity, or and also to retain some access to the playground that is currently opposite the building for the Head Start kids and so forth. And that way you can free up more space, like you're showing there with that oval, for the park and maybe still include an amphitheater. Sorry, I just had a door slam behind me. So I don't know if that's possible. I'm sure it would cost a great deal of money, but certainly, you know, I don't see a reason, and I'm sure Sharon would agree, for the city to not sponsor them in the future for, you know, a public and community facilities CDBG grant to help toward that effort, and so forth. Just a thought. I mean, otherwise, my thought is, obviously we don't want to risk losing that facility somewhere in the downtown, and obviously if we can, we want to retain it somewhere in proximity. So I would think that the only other option conceptually would be to consider having it be somewhere else where we're considering, you know, the market rate housing / compatible commercial uses. So, and I guess that would have to go near the south end of Cruse, near to Park. But I know that that's a slightly wonky building envelope down there. So
You're thinking perhaps down in this area.
I mean, in theory, we could. It would be, I'm sure, an awkwardly sized building, and I don't know how we'd get it sited appropriately. The zoning won't be an issue as far as setbacks and those other standards and things. Right. But regardless, we definitely certainly need to clearly, based on the comments last night and so forth, and what Mike's been hearing today via phone calls, we need to retain that somewhere. And those are just some of my thoughts. Because it does
Those
take.
are
Great,
great
thanks.
thoughts.
Thanks for sharing those. Those are great thoughts.
So,
Now, could it help?
this is Sharon. Is there any thought to putting it by the housing authority, that space of the right of way? I mean, the housing authority has that lot adjacent to it for expansion. So yeah, where that arrow was right there, putting the neighborhood center on that corner.
Like in this spot here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Sharon,
absolutely.
I was kind of wondering that too, because I'm sure that Michael O'Neill would be amenable to having some of those services for, you know, the elderly in the community cited near Emmy Anderson in particular.
You know, or maybe it's a shared facility where
Mhm.
there's the main floor is dedicated to RMDC and Head Start, and the upper floor, maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 stories of affordable housing above it. And then there's a lower level access, which this parking lot would actually serve. There could be a subgrade floor down here for building maintenance and services and all kinds of stuff.
The only thing would be where we would put the playground, because I think that's kind of essential for Head Start kids. But
Yeah,
other than that,
there is quite a bit of green space, like over
yeah,
in,
there is actually, yeah.
you know, and I could see there's quite a bit along the area here too.
Yeah, so that's an alternative. That's an alternative. I can't speak for Rocky and I can't speak for Michael, but I think it's at least worth thinking about.
So I do think that that's going to be a key element in the solutions. And so maybe ultimately what we do is, it's sort of not dependent on whether this cruise maintains vehicular access or becomes a linear park. I think the neighborhood center could either be shown to be kept in its current location, or we could show an option where we extend the walking mall like I've been showing here, in an option where it gets relocated. And so we sort of take it off the table as one of the things that's becoming kind of a, I don't know, focal point of discussions, and just say, look, we're going to have an option where it stays, and we have an option where it gets relocated if that works.
And I
Does
think
that make-
another, oh, sorry, Mike.
I was just going to say, does that make sense at all?
Mm-hmm. It does
Yeah.
to me.
I think it does too. I mean, it is a key anchor for the downtown. It is heavily utilized, and you know, we definitely need to maintain it somewhere. Another thing I was going to say, and this is a deviation from talking about this, and we don't need to move the screen to look at this area, but I would think further along the north end of Cruse, maybe in talking about things, we need to speak to the fact that there could be the possibility in the future for a new parking structure, which would certainly assist with there is a reduction in spaces if you do run the calcs and realize that, yeah, you know, there's a net loss of X number, that could help with some of what we'd be losing potentially.
Yeah.
And highlighting, in fact, you know, this is an opportunity zone. We do have a TIF district. We have all these different things that can help with all these different efforts, but outside of just build grants and so forth. So.
I know there was some discussion, Mike, with some stakeholders of putting a parking structure on the northern end. If you scroll over to the right, if you could, where we have that commercial building.
Right here.
Yeah, have that surface lot become a parking structure. And I think that's going to be tight, but I think it is doable in terms of the footprint.
Yeah, I guess when we think about the structured parking, we need to, I think, do kind of a gut check about where there are currently structures and where it makes sense to plan for future structures. And I guess just to kind of quickly zoom out and for everybody's benefit, I think most people probably know we have the Jackson Street structure, which is located right here. I'm going to put a big red dot or something on that.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got that one. We've got
Sixth.
Sixth, which is sizable. And those are the only two in this area.
Mike, there is one right on the walking mall, right up
Yes.
at the end of Cruse. I also think attention would need to be paid to grade there in that location specifically. If you have a multi-story structure there, it's going to be very, very visible.
I think in addition to what Mike McConnell just said, is that with that site, we'd also want to be, I think, what with having spent all the effort, following on the downtown neighborhood plan to create the downtown zoning code, I don't know that we want to have just a giant honking structure. I think that we want to be cognizant of the design standards that we have for the downtown district, and make sure that it is a building that also has some commercial components, so that, it's how it looks and feels from the actual right-of-way as a pedestrian or otherwise is more inviting and seems more active as a space.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, ideally, the best parking structures have retail spaces that actually engage the streetscape at street level, and the parking is hidden or partially underground. But I guess the question is, the biggest, I don't know, how do people feel about the parking lot where I've got my cursor hovering? I mean, is that lot too valuable to give up?
Which lot is it?
Lot 6, which is the one
Oh, on Broadway, right?
by on Broadway.
And I think given that there's the Jackson Street structure essentially right across the street, I don't know that I'm that concerned with losing that. I mean, maybe the parking folks would have a different take, but I mean, you have that structure there, and then across the street from on Broadway, there's also a public lot right there, exactly. So yeah, I wouldn't be as concerned.
Well, and the other thing that I pay attention to how full these lots all get, and the upper lot where we were showing these 5 residential units, I've never seen this lot close to being full, and of course the chamber lot is never close to being full either. I think that particular lot gets used only because it's 30 steps closer than the lot next to the Jackson Street garage.
And I do have some numbers that I'm looking at right now on that lot number 6 that I can share with you. There's 38 stalls, 26 permits have been sold, and there's 12 available parking spaces. On lot number 5, which is the Chambers lot, there are 51 stalls, only 11 permits sold, and 40 available stalls. So between the two, there's 89 stalls, and 52 of those are still available.
Yeah, so there's adequate parking right there.
There's definitely scope, and I mean, not that it's been said on this call or yesterday's call, but who knows if the chamber building will be there long term.
Right.
And I imagine that those 11 parking permits that are currently there for people that either work for the chamber or for Brian Obert's staff at MBAC in particular. So that's a consideration as well. But I definitely feel like that existing intersection of Cruse and Broadway is just so deeply uninviting to cross. And if it were, I don't see a reason why adding residential or other uses in there would be a bad idea. I think it would make it much more functional and friendly and so much better.
Yeah, it is. Walking from the west to the east is you're taking your life into your own hands.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
It is so incredibly wide.
Hey, Mike, this is Dan Sullivan with Sullivan Financial Group. How are
Hi,
you?
Dan.
Good. It's good. It's a very interesting, really exciting project.
Thanks for joining.
I shot an email off to Michael. So I saw this last night at about 11:30, and I realized when I looked at this online, all of a sudden what I realized is that what I call a monopoly hotel. You put it right on where my truck is right now, parked at this moment. So I thought I better get involved in some of this discussion because I have office space. I have a lot of employees who are in the parking structure, and I park up in lot 4, and so it's the one so that has and right there. So that lot actually gets a fair amount of usage, but it's used on both ends. It's not used in the middle. So where you're putting the structures in there, I think are inviting. It's just that, but if you look at both sides, those are usually packed. I'm really surprised. The parking down there is tight under most days, and certainly not at this moment if you go out there right now with COVID-19. But when the dentist has a lot of staff up on top there, and there's a fair. I don't know what you must have probably lot 4 numbers. I don't know what, maybe you already talked about how many permits are sold in lot 4, but it's becoming a more important lot too because people can't figure out these new parking meters. That's one of the few free places, so it's been getting a fair amount of use because of with the change in parking, and so with it, just want to weigh in on that, and I'm sure you probably will get to the other phases because I have some concerns about the other phases, but I appreciate, once again, I'm excited. I understand the design flaws of Cruse, and you're absolutely right. I'm on this street. I'm on Cruse Street about at least every 3 times a week, and a minimum. So I'm very familiar with this area, and we've had our office in the arcade building for years. So very familiar with the whole neighborhood. I walk it, I bike it, I park it. So, but you're absolutely right. Over that intersection of Broadway and Cruse does need to, it's really tough for anybody walking across there and stuff. So once again, I'm really excited about the project, but I also have some concerns. So just wanted to weigh in. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Adam's probably, the arcade building is this building right here.
Yeah.
That he was talking about, and there are quite a few offices in that building. The Jackson Street garage definitely serves sort of this section of downtown Helena, and I think that garage is fairly full, isn't it? I guess I never go in it, so I don't really know. The top looks sort of empty, but
the top might have space, but you try to get a permit there, you're a year or 2 out. You have been. I cannot get all my staff in that garage. So
Part of the reason for that is just because the residents in the placer use that for their parking.
Yeah.
So that's a consideration. Yeah, the ground level definitely does have space during the daytime. And there are some spaces just to the north of it. You can see there's like a little white truck or car parked there. But there are certain portions of that need a little TLC. So.
There's also a structure just to the north of where your pointer is, Mike. That's right on the walking mall. So what buildings does that serve?
Medical arts, or that's the medical arts block.
Okay, so those two are
That,
connected.
that's not a public structure, is it? I guess the lower level is. I guess it is public.
Yeah.
I believe it is public, yeah.
The top is reserved for the businesses for the medical arts building.
It's reserved for them, but it is still part of the city-owned structure overall. And it's not the most easily accessible. None of these structures are 100% perfect from an accessibility standpoint as well, which I'm just going to say that as the ADA coordinator, having walked through them with people doing audits and stuff. So, I mean, there's room for improvement in them.
Yeah, and I think that one is in particular, or particularly troublesome, given that you have to drive onto the walking mall to get into it, into the bottom level anyways.
Do we want to look at the linear park one and have some discussion on that?
I think that would be a good idea, yeah. I know Mr. Sullivan had some concerns or comments anyways.
I do, yeah.
All right, share away.
So one of my great challenges on this plan, linear plan, this is closing it?
Correct.
So, I mean, this might be a little controversial, but the walking mall is great, about 3 months of the year. We live in, but when we get winter, 6 months of the year. And I was at the Windbag yesterday, and they had their garage doors open for lunch. They were open for about 5 minutes, and they closed them because it was too cold. People aren't sitting outside. It's too cold yet. And so as we're doing this planning, it feels to me that we're doing this planning for an area that is of a different weather pattern. That when I look out on the walking mall, most days it's pretty empty. So adding in additional parkway where we have a wide variety of parks around it, to me is I don't think it enhances it, or I don't think it. Yeah, it's wonderful, but but what you're giving up is any ability for my employees getting in and out of downtown gets restricted quite a bit. And what happens in here is when snow falls, you're not getting up 6th Avenue. You're not getting up Broadway. You're going downhill. You're not going up. And you have to either go on Cruse, or you're going through Fuller, or you're going on Park or Benton. And right now, when I come out of the parking lot of Lot 4, I don't take it's faster. It's nearer for me to, for example, to take a left to come out of there and go on to 6th and go up over to Holter Street. But that's not the way I go, because it's congested. So I go right onto Cruse and go over to Broadway and down Broadway and over to Park. Once you hit Park, you stop. When you hit that three-way, if it's nighttime, if you're sitting at around starting at about 4:45 to 5:30, that three-way stop area can be backed up all the way over to the city county building. And you sit there. And now my favorite, okay, I'll go up and around on Clark Street. So right around the city county building, I get out of the mess. But that isn't the way my employees have to go. My clients can't go that way. They're not interested in going up that way. They're trying to get out north. And so by closing off Cruse, that's a pretty substantial amount of flow that when there's snow flying or when we have winter, or just under normal circumstances, it's a pretty important part of people's ability to get around the downtown Helena area. And I'd love it. I ride my bike a lot. I walk a lot, but a lot of older people, I've got a lot of, both my mother-in-laws are in their 70s and 80s, and they still love to walk, but they also want the opportunity to drive, and they want to be able to get into the downtown area. And I'm concerned that all of a sudden it's feeling like we're squeezing the downtown. We're squeezing it for traffic, and I don't think we're getting much. We're not getting a lot of extra outdoor. We have a lot of what we already have. We're just getting more of it, and it's beautiful. It looks like a golf course, and it looks beautiful. But I'm concerned that it takes away a lot of the functionality and livability, and restricting access for my clients and staff. So that's what my concern on the closing of the Cruse Avenue. I like the idea of, I agree that there's a lot of extra space and redesigning it is remarkable. But I'm very concerned about having it closed.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's, definitely why we're having these discussions.
And Dan, what would be your thoughts on option 3, which is a hybrid of the two, option 1 and option 2, keeping Cruse Avenue open between Broadway and 6th, but south of Broadway towards the neighborhood center building, turning that into a linear park? How do you view that option in terms of what you mentioned, functionality and livability, and its impacts to downtown businesses?
So I don't live up the Unionville area, and I don't have houses over off of State Street. But I would just say, well, you're going to push a lot of traffic into a residential. And so as it goes up State Street, I cut that color as everyone will start moving, like they're coming through there. And then you have only one way. Otherwise, you have one way coming on Park. So your options of getting through there are a lot more limited. And I think that, I realize you keep talking about making it available for emergency vehicles, but I think, well, how about if you just, I like the idea of making it more narrow, that's fine. But I think taking that away, that it makes a nice way to get around the town, that when other activities are going on in downtown, I think that it makes it nice. Cruse Avenue is a nice way to get around that, but you're going to have to, otherwise you're putting people out onto Rodney and everywhere else. And that kind of defeats the purpose of if you're trying to make this, you're pushing the traffic instead of you're putting it on other neighbors. And so rather than having a street that can handle that, it's going to go into a lot of areas that I think are not designed as well, or have a lot of blind spots. I love the State Street area. That's great. But it's when you hit that 4-way stop on State and Rodney, I mean, it's a pretty blind area. And that becomes a pretty, so now you've got these two areas where still have the three-way stop problem at the corner of Park and Broadway. And now you're adding more traffic over, I think, over onto Rodney and to State Street or that split. So I think it's, I mean,
so Dan, one of the reasons why this is being considered is just because the traffic counts on that section of Cruse are in the neighborhood of 1,500 vehicles per day.
Okay.
And as a point of reference, Park Avenue, as it turns into Benton, you know, as you were describing, sort of exiting the downtown. I don't know, Adam, if you've got the numbers on that section, but it's more like 10,000 cars per day.
Okay.
So it's 10 times the vehicular traffic. And then as another point of reference, Lyndale Avenue is like 27,000 cars per day. So the impact, I think, to the neighborhood would be minimal. There's just not very many cars per day that are driving on that section of Cruse Avenue.
Sure.
The point is a good point, and I'm glad you're bringing it up. But I think in all of these, there definitely needs to be, you know, a reference to what the impact really, you know, is.
Absolutely. We bet. No, it doesn't, Mike, it doesn't surprise me at all that doesn't have a lot of traffic. But as you are looking at different pieces of it, that whether or not that part, you know, as long as you feel like you can get to the neighborhood center and the library, I know, so that's probably what a lot of people on getting the library when if it's busy, they go around that way. But
and it may be that you know, if traffic is left on the section of Cruse to the right, you know, the part from Broadway going to downtown, that maybe it just doesn't make any sense to have a section that's closed. I mean, that's why we're sort of throwing these all out here versus, you know, the option that's a narrowed street option, the whole distance, you know, with more space given over to pedestrians and bicycles on either side of it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, if you must have, so if you're doing counts on that, I mean, the pedestrians and right now the pedestrians and bicyclists in there have got to be pretty low number too.
Yeah, true.
So we're developing this great walking area that's not used now. It's not used, and we can't even.
The one thing that has been identified, I think, that is significant is that Cruse is both a psychological and a physical barrier between the neighborhoods to the west and the downtown.
Sure.
And so the solution is perhaps more about feeding people into the gulch on a east-west sort of access, and, you know, making Cruse Avenue free up some of its right-of-way space for infill housing into the downtown area, which, you know, studies show is what really is needed to have a downtown become more vibrant and strong. So I think it's really, it's not just one goal.
Sure.
It's the goal of, we narrow up Cruse Avenue to be more like a street that's designed for the amount of traffic that's actually on it.
Great.
And what that does for us is it gives us opportunities to have these sort of fingers of access points between the neighborhoods, like we were describing, sort of this Warren Street ability to get down through there, and you know, where the 7th Avenue gym is, and be able to get down, and, you know, having access to the pedestrian underpass that leads into Pioneer Park and Anchor Park. These things don't exist right now.
Yeah.
And even just the street intersections themselves, as we've been talking about, gives us the opportunity to make this way more pedestrian friendly.
Right. I agree entirely. I agree on that aspect of making this a lot more friendly, and it's always going to be a challenge going east-west on this.
Yeah,
North Pike standpoint, because it's a steep hill.
it's a steep hill.
And, and, and so I'd say, well, that's the challenge we have in Helena, where, we can create something unique in Helena that's different than the Billings, Missoula, Bozeman, et cetera, except for we have one big problem that they don't have. And we got the steep hills. And yeah, maybe as you go to different towns now and they got a lot more electric scooters zipping around, and maybe we'll see maybe that's going to be the big change going forward, is the whole move to electric vehicles and electric scooters and the like. But from a standpoint of walkers and bikers, I mean, you're going to get a sweat in. When I ride my bike home from downtown, I know my wife always thinks I'm having a heart attack, and it's just because I'm pedaling uphill. And so I like it, moving it thinner and providing more access. But I don't, and maybe emotionally and maybe visually, it creates a greater sense of connection. Because I do think, that right there, there's the worst of it right there.
Yeah,
if you're walking up, if you're going on Broadway and walking up that hill, it's terrifying, because it's steep. It's steep, and trying to get across it fast, it's tough. But but I think that the realization that it's going to be it's a challenging place just because it's steep.
Yeah, I just thought I'd bring up this drone footage because you can really see the hills on the right-hand side of Cruse Avenue. A lot of this footage, as well as the hills on the left-hand side. It's not an easy challenge.
Right.
This is the Fire Tower Hill on the right, and it's a huge drop. And the access, that's the neighborhood center just to the left. Isn't that? No, that's not the neighborhood center. Kind of skip over the neighborhood center. That's where the windbag is, down in that area. Anyway, just thought I'd share that.
Any other comments, questions, or concerns from any of the participants today?
What is the process? I mean, I was a little concerned when I read the paper about where we're going to have 2 days of public comment, and then I don't know what the process is, because I've never seen option 2 or 3 in the master plan. When I read the master plan, I didn't never see it. So it's kind of a big surprise to me. And I'm not always great with new things and new surprises. So I'm just trying to understand and appreciate. Once again, I like that you're working on this. I think, as Mike, as you alluded, that having more downtown housing would be marvelous. Big proponent. I love it. Love Lot 6, I think, is a really good usage. Part of Lot 4, I have no problem with. It's great usage. But I just trying to understand where the process is, and maybe you already covered that at the beginning. If you did, I apologize.
No, I think I'll just elaborate a little bit on the downtown master plan versus where we are now. So in the downtown master plan, it was sort of like I describe it as a 30,000 foot view of things.
Okay.
And there was definitely reference made to sort of this concept of freeing up right-of-way space that would ultimately provide an opportunity to have some housing. And so then this effort is more detailed look at Cruse Avenue as a part of our town, and you know, what is ultimately the right solution serving our community. And so we've been having we had weeks of stakeholder workshops where we just collected input in people's thoughts, and that this sort of what you're seeing now is the result of what came out of those stakeholder interviews. And during that process, the idea of providing access into the trail systems and trailheads to the south, up Park and up towards that area, is right now, if someone perhaps is going to find a place to park and ride their bike and head up into those trails, that maybe there's an enhanced way to make that a better experience through the downtown. And so the idea of a linear park just started coming up. So that's kind of why we're where we are now. And Adam, I guess I'll let you sort of elaborate on the process as we're moving forward, and maybe Sharon and Michael has some more to add to that.
Yeah, so thanks, Mike, for that background. And, you know, this is the important part of the process, I would say, in taking, you know, the synthesis of those interviews and visualizing those concepts and these options and getting feedback from the public on what challenges, obstacles, you know, strengths exist with each of those options. And, you know, over the course of the next couple of days, we'll be receiving that input from the public and taking that and refining these options and narrowing them down into, you know, the most viable alternative based on the public input. And that will be our recommendation, you know, to the city, you know, as an outcome of this process. And, you know, it's, I think, you know, this week we're really focused on kind of these virtual charrettes, and we'll have a wrap up Thursday evening from 5:30 to 7, sharing the input that we received and what changes would be made, and where we're seeing that viable alternative emerge based on those comments. And then, you know, I think we'll take, you know, a couple of weeks to refine that and present that most viable alternative at I think another public meeting, so that and receive public input again, and refine it and have a final deliverable at that point. So you know, this is a process we're wanting to make sure that we get it right. And as Mike said, we want something that is doable and that's actionable and something that can be implemented. So, you know, we're still midstream in this process, collecting input and refining things. Again, nothing's predetermined. And, you know, these are visualizations to facilitate discussion and really help key in on that most viable alternative.
Thank you.
Mike or Sharon, do you have anything else to add on that in terms of the process?
I was going to say you summed it up pretty well. I mean, as I've been telling everybody, this is kind of the beginning of the meat of the process. And at the end of the day, we hope to have a vision that can help us redevelop, particularly this area of the downtown. But it's all towards that ultimate goal in the downtown master plan and the urban renewal plan, is that we look at utilization of underutilized properties. We try to create a mix of residential and commercial, and this looked like an opportunity. And we've been hearing comments for a long time about how to better use Cruse. So that's one of the things we've been hearing. So I think this is a great opportunity for people to share with us what that vision of reinventing Cruse really looks like. That's really all I would have to add.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Okay, well, if there are no other comments or questions, I think we'll just wrap things up. We certainly appreciate everyone participating this morning and sharing your thoughts and comments. We certainly have some additional work to do on our end. We're really excited about this process and about the about Cruse Avenue and what it can become. And so we'll look forward to developing the input and feedback over the course of the next couple of days. We'll have our debrief Thursday evening from 5:30 to 7. So feel free to tune in on that. And I think that will give you a good sense of the direction in which we're heading based on the input and feedback that we've received. So thank you all very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks. Bye.